Basic English Grammar for ESL Students, Lesson 21, Adverbs of Frequency and Who questions. Frequency adverbs. Adverbs are used to give you more information about the verb. Think of adverbs as adding to the verb. Adverbs of frequency are used in the present tense. Adverbs of frequency come before the verb, except for the verb to be. For example, the verb play in present tense, the adverb comes before the verb. In the verb to be, am, is, and are, the adverb comes after the verb. Adverbs of frequency. Adverbs of frequency answer the question, how often? Many textbooks use a percentage to explain how often. The next page will show you what most textbooks use to define frequency adverbs. You do not need to study the percentages for each adverb. You only need to know which adverbs are more than 50% and which adverbs are less than 50%. There are 10 common adverbs of frequency, but there are only 2 adverbs that have an exact percentage. The first one is always. Always is 100%. It would be every day. Usually is not exactly 90%. It's only a guide. That would be 9 out of 10 days. Frequently, some people say it's 80%. It's 8 out of 10 days. Often, it's listed as 60%. That would be 6 out of 10 days. Sometimes is 50%. This one is pretty accurate. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. That would be 5 out of 10 days. 40% occasionally. That would be 4 out of 10 days. 30% rarely. That would be 3 out of 10 days. 20% seldom. That would be 2 out of 10 days. 10% hardly ever. That would be 1 out of 10 days. The second adverb that is exact is never. That is 0%. 0 days. Here are the 5 adverbs of frequency that I use the most. Always, usually, sometimes, hardly ever, and never. If the frequency is more than 50%, I use usually. If the frequency is less than 50%, I use hardly ever. If the frequency is 50% or 50-50, I use sometimes. If it's 100%, I use always. If it's 0, I use never. Here is a sentence in present tense. I drink coffee in the kitchen every morning. The arrow points to an answer. What's the question? What do you do every morning? The answer, coffee. What's the question? What do you drink every morning? Every morning. What's the question? When do you drink coffee? In the kitchen. What's the question? Where do you drink coffee every morning? I do. What's the question? Who drinks coffee every morning? Yes, I do. What's the question? Do you drink coffee every morning? How often do you drink coffee in the morning? I always drink coffee in the morning. What do you always do every morning? I always drink. What do you always drink every morning? Coffee. When do you always drink coffee? Every morning. Where do you always drink coffee every morning? In the kitchen. Who always drinks coffee every morning? I do. Do you always drink coffee every morning? Yes, I do. Another present tense. He drinks coffee in the kitchen every morning. What's the question? What does he do every morning? Coffee. What's the question? What does he drink every morning? Every morning. The question? When does he drink coffee? In the kitchen. Where does he drink coffee every morning? He does. Who drinks coffee every morning? Yes, he does. What's the question? Does he drink coffee every morning? More than 50%? Less than 100%? How often does he drink coffee in the morning? He usually drinks coffee in the kitchen every morning. What's the question? What does he usually do every morning? The question? What does he usually drink every morning? The question? When does he usually drink coffee? In the kitchen. Where does he usually drink coffee every morning? The question? Who usually drinks coffee every morning? The question? Does he usually drink coffee every morning? Does she drink coffee at night? Number one, no, she does not drink coffee at night. Number two, no, she doesn't drink coffee at night. Number three, no, she never, drink needs an S, so it's no, she never drinks coffee at night. How often does she drink coffee at night? 0%. Never. Now the question, does she never drink coffee at night? That changes to does she ever drink coffee at night? Number one, no, she does not. Number two, no, she doesn't. Number three, no, she never does. Do you eat eggs for breakfast? Yes, I do. Do you eat eggs for breakfast every day? Number one, no, I do not. Number two, no, I don't. How often do you eat eggs for breakfast? More than 50%, but less than 100%. So I would say, I usually eat eggs for breakfast. What do you usually eat for breakfast? I usually eat eggs. Do you usually eat eggs for breakfast? Number 1, yes, I do. Number 2, yes, I usually eat eggs. Do they eat eggs for dinner? Yes, they do. Do they eat eggs for dinner every day? Number 1, no, they do not. Number 2, no, they don't. How often do they eat eggs for dinner? More than 0, but less than 50. I would say they hardly ever eat eggs for dinner. Do they ever eat eggs for dinner? Yes, they do. What do they hardly ever eat for dinner? They hardly ever eat eggs. He is a happy man. How often is he happy? 100%. He is always happy. Now notice the frequency adverb comes after the verb to be. She is a happy woman. How often is she happy? 86%. I would say she is usually happy. Are you sad? Yes, I am. How often are you sad? 33%. I am hardly ever sad. Adverbs of frequency are used with the present tense form of the verb. This is Bill and Alice. Bill and Alice ride their horse on Saturdays. Present tense. They do not ride their horse every Saturday. How often do they ride their horse on Saturdays? 80%. I would say they usually ride their horse on Saturdays. Bill and Alice usually ride their horse on Saturdays. What's the question? Who usually rides their horse on Saturdays? Bill and Alice do. The answer is ride. ride their horse? What's the question? What do Bill and Alice usually do on Saturdays? On Saturdays. What's the question? When do Bill and Alice usually ride their horse? Do Bill and Alice ride their horse every Saturday? No, they don't. Bill usually sits in front of Alice. Alice usually sits in back of Bill. Who usually sits in front of Alice? Bill does. Who does Bill usually sit in front of? Alice. Now, the answer is Alice. What's the question? Who usually sits in back of Bill? Now, the answer is Bill. What's the question? Who does Alice usually sit in back of? Bill hardly ever sits in back of Alice. Alice hardly ever sits in front of Bill. Who hardly ever sits in back of Alice? Bill does. Who does Bill hardly ever sit in back of? Alice. The answer is Alice. What's the question? Who hardly ever sits in front of Bill? Now the answer is Bill. What's the question? Who does Alice hardly ever sit in front of? Frequency adverbs and who. The teacher talks to his students every day. Now the answer, the teacher does. What's the question? Who talks to his students every day? Now the answer, he talks to his students. What's the question? Who does the teacher talk to every day? How often do the students listen to their teacher? 50%. Sometimes. They sometimes listen to him. Subject pronoun they, object pronoun him. Question? Who do the students sometimes listen to? You have to change the subject pronoun to students. They sometimes listen to their teacher. You can use the subject pronoun they, but the object pronoun him has to change to teacher. What's the question? Remember to change the pronoun. Who sometimes listens to their teacher? The students do. Now that we are at the end of this lesson, I need to explain some more information about adverbs. I said at the beginning of this lesson that frequency adverbs are used before present tense verbs and after the verb to be. This is correct, but there are other adverbs that do not answer a how often question, and they can be used in the other tenses. And in most cases, they are used after the verb. Watch for more lessons coming soon. Richard. This is the end of Basic English Grammar for ESL students, Lesson 21, Adverbs of Frequency and Who questions.